Good evening. Can you hear me? Great. My name is Brian Dories. I'm the Artistic Director of Theater of War Productions. Thank you all for coming out. We have a few groups that are still coming and joining us. It's okay. We think of these not as performances, but more like a meeting. And if we could do this out of my loft or living room, we would, but it doesn't have this tech set up, so we have to do it here. But we're so grateful to the Greene Space and WNYC for hosting us and for hosting you and having you be part of the fourth installment of our long-form journalism series, which is an experiment. We're still, for 18 years, Theater of War Productions has been presenting ancient Greek tragedies and Shakespeare and poetry and all kinds of texts. But thanks to my colleague Marjolaine Goldsmith sitting in the back, we decided a couple years ago we were going to experiment with the idea of performing long-form journalism. And would it work? Who knows? But we've been trying it. We've partnered with the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and now ProPublica and WPLN on this series. And WNYC has been a steadfast partner. And I'm going to do a little bit more of an experiment tonight. As we've been doing more and more of these events, I, as the host of the show that broadcasts subsequently after this live recording, in the other episodes have done most of my narration in post, but we're kind of moving toward a more live sound. So I'll hope you'll forgive me, those of you here and those of you watching on Zoom. I'm going to read the narration and speak to you as an audience as I would the radio audience. And I'll have to break it up a few times to do it because this is a live recording of a radio program that's going to broadcast in a couple of weeks. And you're part of that experiment with us. So the discussion, the performance, the liveness of this whole exchange will be something that people who don't know what they're getting into when they turn on the radio or they're driving their cars, all of a sudden will hear and feel. So that's the idea. I'm going to just sit down because I can't really chew gum and do narration and walk and talk at the same time. But I'm going to say one more thing, which is that I'm going to make mistakes. The actors are going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. And that's okay because we're trying to create a space where we can make mistakes and we can recover. That's how I would define being a professional, the recovery part. But the great part about it is we can make mistakes. And when I make a mistake doing the narration, I might retrack it. The actors might retract what they say. You might not have your words yet when you start to speak. And as you find what you need to say, you may find a better way of saying it, and you might correct yourself. But we're all going to take the risk of being present together. That's the idea behind what we're going to do. So I'm just going to get right down to it. And I'm going to read Seg A of my narration for the radio show, and then I'm going to bring out the actors, and then you all are going to applaud them like we're at Shea Stadium. And it's going to sound so great on the radio because of all the warmth that's coming through the speakers. And then we're going to get right down to business with our performance of this amazing article by Paige Pfleger. I'm Brian Dories, Artistic Director of Theater of War Productions. I've been directing plays for most of my life, and I believe that great performances have the power to touch us deeply, to wake us up, to open our hearts to new possibilities, to other perspectives, to complexity, to contradiction. And I've come to see that great actors can put us in touch with our emotions so we can have hard conversations about things that sometimes divide us, with humility, compassion, and a clear sense for what's at stake. At Theater of War Productions, we perform powerful texts, and then we pass the mic to people in the audience to share their perspectives, their opinions, their lived experiences, just like all of you, here in this room, and the thousands of people all over the country and the world tuning in on Zoom. It turns out we have a group of community members gathering tonight in a college classroom in Scott County, Tennessee, that includes local judges, a police officer, survivors, and advocates. Our story today is based in Tennessee, in two different rural communities, Scott County and Lewis County. This is a story about domestic violence. Domestic violence happens all around us. It's an American issue. It's a global one, too. This story takes place in Tennessee, where the rates of women killed by men are some of the highest in the country. Most of these murders are committed with guns. In recent years, the gun laws in Tennessee have made it easier for people to buy and sell firearms. Is there anything that can be done to stop the killing? The story you're about to hear is about a couple of communities that are attempting to answer this question, not just by changing their legal approach, but also by helping perpetrators to change. The article's called, "In Rural Tennessee, Domestic Violence Victims Face Barriers to Getting Justice. one county has transformed its approach. It was written by Paige Pfleger for ProPublica and WPLN in Nashville. The actors who will be reading the piece are Debra Winger, Josh Hamilton, Daphne Rubin-Vega, and Bill Irwin. Please welcome them to the stage.
Before rural Scott County remade itself into a model for managing domestic violence, Jade Peters didn't know where to turn for help.
Her ex-boyfriend was stalking her and threatened to kill other men who talked to her.
She knew he had a gun, but so did many people in Scott County, and she didn't think the justice system would take her seriously.
One night, in 2009, Peters was walking up her steps when she saw someone approaching. As he got closer, she realized it was her ex-boyfriend.
She fumbled with her keys, trying to set off her car alarm.
He pulled his hand out of his pocket. A sudden bright light pierced the darkness, the flash of a gun firing. The bullet tore through Peters' mouth and throat, with fragments lodging in her spine.
When she was able to drag herself into her house to call for help, she remembers avoiding her reflection in the mirror, not wanting to see what damage the bullet had done.
A few years ago, Scott County decided that the system that Peters and other domestic violence victims across the state contended with wasn't good enough. Tennessee consistently has one of the highest rates of women killed by men, and most of those homicides are committed with a gun.
Yet over the years, the state has loosened its gun laws, making it easier for people to buy and carry firearms. The state bars domestic abusers and people with felony convictions from having guns, but ProPublica and WPLN, the public radio station in Nashville, found those laws are rarely enforced.
Tucked into the Appalachian foothills along the Kentucky border, Scott County recognized that victims in rural areas face unique barriers. There are few resources like domestic violence shelters.
Law enforcement and the courts typically lack staff and training, and cultural attitudes about domestic violence and guns can make officers and judges less likely to believe women or more reluctant to take firearms away from abusers.
The county completely overhauled the way it handles domestic violence cases. It brought most of the agencies that deal with domestic violence into one building called the Family Justice Center. It then started one of the state's only court programs solely dedicated to handling domestic violence cases.
And vitally, the county took steps to better ensure that people subject to domestic violence charges or protection orders don't have guns.
Jade Peters said that if the reforms had existed when she needed them, she would have known where to get help.
It would have made a difference.
Separating dangerous people from their guns is an issue that much of the country grapples with, but in Tennessee,
it's even more inconsistent in these rural communities,
said Heather Herman, who oversees a statewide group that studies domestic violence homicides from her office in Nashville. She said in rural areas, judges are more likely to consider things like whether abusers hunt or have jobs that require guns.
In rural Lewis County in Middle Tennessee, for example, Judge Mike Hinson said protecting gun rights weighs heavily in his decisions. It can be hard to justify signing an order of protection, which can bar someone from coming near the victim, contacting them, or having firearms if a gun wasn't involved in the domestic violence incident, he said.
It's those cases where I try to balance a person's rights because they do have a Second Amendment right, and they do have a right to protect themselves, and they do have a right to get a job. That's a tougher balance.
Judge Hinson said.
It's a balance he acknowledged he doesn't always get right.
Even if a judge orders someone to give up their guns, there's a glaring gap in Tennessee's system.
It's about one of a dozen states, It's one of about a dozen states that allows someone to give their gun to a third party, like a friend or relative, instead of a law enforcement agency or a licensed firearms dealer.
And it doesn't require that the person be identified to the court.
In such cases, someone could say they gave up their guns but still have access to them, advocates for domestic violence victims said.
Scott County, in the rural eastern Tennessee Appalachian foothills, saw that gap and decided to change its firearms form, requiring abusers to name the person who is holding the guns and list their addresses. That person has to sign a form to verify they have the guns.
Victim advocates said Scott is the only one of Tennessee's 95 counties that has done this.
It's difficult to measure Scott County's success because the numbers are so small. But data from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation shows that while domestic violence incidents have fallen slightly across the state, in Scott County, they've dropped by more than half.
No other rural county in Tennessee has yet followed Scott's lead. And throughout the states, old attitudes prevail.
On the other side of Nashville from Scott County is a region of rolling hills and cropland where guns and hunting are also a big part of life.
This area of Middle Tennessee is represented by This area of Middle Tennessee is represented in Congress by Representative Andy Ogles, a Republican who in 2021 sent out a Christmas card of his family holding guns. Ogles didn't respond to calls or emails from WPLN and ProPublica, but has told reporters he didn't regret the card.
That culture permeates all the way up the justice system to judges.
When you have a really insular community, a really gun-focused community, and often a community that maybe has some misconceptions or stereotyping of what domestic violence is and what it means, then you have judges, not always, but often, who carry those same beliefs.
Herman, the researcher from Nashville, said.
Judges in Tennessee have an incredible amount of power in how they run their courtrooms, which can greatly affect domestic violence cases.
If a case lacks obvious physical signs of abuse, judges may fall back on their own notions of about domestic violence, which research shows favors the defendants.
In Middle Tennessee's Lewis County, Judge Hinson said he sees himself as a representative for the culture. The county proudly boasts one of the largest collection of mounted trophy heads in North America. The old courthouse has a bullet hole from when a man going through a divorce brought a gun to confront his wife. The new courthouse is across the street from a store advertising that we sell ammo. With only about 12,500 residents, the county is the type of place where most people know each other, which can make domestic violence difficult.
Since 2014, most of those cases have gone before Hinson, a Lewis County native with icy blue eyes and gray hair. Some folks around Lewis County call him the people's judge. He often wears a quarter-zip sweater or a button-down shirt in court instead of a judicial robe. And he speaks plainly, like he's talking to a friend he ran into in the store instead of someone in a jailhouse jumpsuit.
Hinson's casual attitude and off-the-cuff remarks caused him to be suspended by the Administrative Office of the Court's Board of Judicial Conduct in 2021. In one case, in which he denied a woman an order of protection, the board said he made a
demeaning
comment telling the couple that another judge would
wade through that bullshit
in their divorce. He later apologized for the remark.
Sometimes, Hinson said, he finds the law constricting and prefers to take his own approach.
Once, that resulted in him dismissing hundreds of traffic tickets because he thought the community was being overtly targeted. It made him popular among some residents, and less so with the Tennessee Highway Patrol.
I don't believe the law was made for us to worship.
Hinson said.
I believe the law is a tool.
That applies to the domestic violence cases he sees in his courtroom, which, he said, often result from addiction. It's a struggle Hinson himself relates to. He said he had a drinking problem and anger issues that ended his last marriage, something he shares with the men who appear before him in court.
Some people just might need a little anger management,
Hinson said.
Some people, it's just a bad day and the only time it's ever happened.
Hinson also said he thinks some women overuse protection orders to gain the upper hand in a divorce case or custody battle.
This is stuff that we hear from every corner of the state.
Herman, the researcher from Nashville, said.
In these small towns in particular, people talk. They know what the judge has said to other people. They know how other people's cases have gone.
Some victims who went through Lewis County Court said Hinson's sympathy for the men made them feel dismissed or like they were the ones being reprimanded.
Multiple victims asked not to be named because it's a small community and they worried it would affect their cases.
WPLN and ProPublica also sat in on Hinson's court.
In February, Hinson admonished a woman who sought a protection order against her ex-boyfriend after he fired a gun into the ceiling during an argument.
Instead of granting the order of protection, Hinson put the man under a no-contact order, which didn't require him to give up his firearms.
He told the man he couldn't reach out to the woman, but he also told the woman her ex-boyfriend wouldn't be held responsible if she contacted him first, and he replied.
If that happens, Hinson said.
I'm going to take his side.
And he urged her not to do what some women do, reaching out to their partners after leaving court to work out their problems.
We're not going to be doing that,
he told her.
A month later, another woman in Hinson's court seemed surprised by the way the judge spoke to her estranged husband after he assaulted her.
Instead of chastising him about his behavior, Hinson appeared to try to motivate her husband by telling him his wife thought he was
a great guy.
The woman sitting in the courtroom that day leaned over to a victim's advocate and said,
I never said that.
That was the first part of Paige Pfleger's piece from WPLN in Nashville. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll hear the rest of the story before our audience responds. I'm Brian Dories, and this is Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Stick around. I'm Brian Dories, and you're listening to Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Our series invites people to respond to journalism in real time. At an event at WNYC's street-level studio in New York City, we just heard actors perform the first part of a piece from WPLN in Nashville. It's a story about domestic abuse and guns, and how the two collide in rural communities in Tennessee, a state that has some of the highest rates of women being killed by men, often with guns. The article began with the story of a woman named Jade Peters who was nearly killed by her ex-boyfriend. The story is set in two communities, Lewis County, where many victims say the pro-gun local judge downplayed domestic violence cases, and Scott County, where Jade lives, which recently overhauled its court system's approach to preventing domestic violence. The actors are Debra Winger, Josh Hamilton, Daphne Rubin-Vega, and Bill Irwin. Here's Debra.
About 200 miles away in eastern Tennessee, as the early morning fog cleared over the Scott County Justice Center, in May, men slowly trickled into the courtroom under a sign in Greek that translates roughly to, "A man's character is his fate." Their work boots thudded on the floor as they found seats on the wooden benches.
All rise.
The bailiff said.
Domestic violence court is now in session.
The men had already been convicted of domestic violence or were subject to protection orders. They were there so that Judge Scarlett Ellis could monitor whether they were keeping up with their probation appointments and other conditions like mental health and addiction treatments.
Ellis looked up over her glasses with a kind smile at the group of men in front of her, the way a teacher might greet her class. Then, one by one, they stood in front of her. She peppered them with questions.
How has therapy been going? Have you avoided contact with your victim? What have you learned in Batterer's intervention class?
Ellis's approach is encouraging but not lenient. When it's clear that the men before her have made strides toward changing their behaviors, she doesn't hesitate to tell them.
One man stood at the podium, his hands clasped behind his back, as he responded to her questions with,
Yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am.
he had an interview later that day for a better paying job, he said.
You've changed your life.
She told him.
I can see it. I really can.
Ellis can use her discretion to have those who were doing well come to court less often. But if they're not complying, she can also extend their probation or send them to jail.
Later in the day, when victims came to the domestic violence court for new cases to be heard, they were ushered by a court advocate into a back room to keep them separate from the men they say abused them.
It's one of the many victim-centered changes the court has made. When their protection order hearing comes up, the victim stands at one podium, the offender at another, with the court advocate and a sheriff's deputy between them.
Domestic violence court is held on a separate day from other cases to protect victims' privacy.
I was already embarrassed with all that had happened and being assaulted, and then to have to be in a room with people who had done drugs and stole from others was just more embarrassing and belittling.
One person wrote in a community needs assessment that was conducted before the court was created.
Ultimately, a judge's orders are only as strong as their enforcement, which Scott County has also tried to address. Like many rural counties, the Scott County Sheriff's Department is small and understaffed, but it has a dedicated domestic violence officer to help victims.
I'm their voice.
Deputy Danielle Gayhart said in her raspy twang.
They've done their side of it by getting their order of protection.
Gayhart has listened to jailhouse phone calls to see if an abuser was contacting a victim. She also checks social media. Once, a man posted a picture of himself hunting deer with a gun. When she sees those things, she'll charge people with violating protection orders.
When it comes to anything like that, I'm your girl,
She said.
One of the keys to holding defendants accountable in Scott County is its batterers intervention program.
In other rural counties, attending one can mean a long drive.
In Lewis County, for example, the closest one is over 1 hour away.
Judges in those places often won't list it as a court condition because it's too hard to get to. But Scott County's class is 10 minutes from the courthouse.
During one class, 6 men crowded around folding tables pushed together in a square. "We repeat what we don't repair," was scrawled on a whiteboard on the wall.
The facilitator led them through an exercise on how to recognize the signs of anger in their bodies and stop it before they take it out on someone else.
Feeling hot-headed? Try sticking your head in the freezer. Feeling restless? Take a walk. Clenching your teeth? Chew a piece of gum.
Many of the men are still in the relationships that put them in the court, so creating these plans is urgent.
While the 26-week class is court-ordered, the men weren't shy about participating.
I'm not real good at showing my feelings.
One man said.
I've never have been. You know, I was raised.
You don't wear your feelings on your sleeve.
Another chimed in from across the table.
That's right. Growing up, you know, I was raised that you're a man. You're not supposed to show that because nobody gives a shit. You're supposed to be stronger than that.
Programs like this one have led to change, according to Jade Peters, the young woman whose ex-boyfriend assaulted her in 2009. After the shooting, the ex-boyfriend pleaded guilty to attempted murder and was sentenced to prison. Peters recovered from her wounds and went back to school to become a lawyer, representing clients in Judge Ellis's domestic violence cases.
She said men in Scott County know that when they're brought to court on a domestic violence charge, there will be serious consequences.
Men are somewhat afraid of that.
Peters said.
They're very aware that you can be dispossessed of firearms for a year, and that you can lose a lot of your rights, that you can be sentenced to programs and court appearances.
She said that empowerment for victims and accountability for offenders has had an impact beyond just the court program. The system change has led to broader cultural change in Scott County.
There's still women in bad situations.
Jade Peters said.
It's just that now there's more help for them.
That's the end of our dramatic presentation for this evening. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to invite our... All right. invite our actors to come find their seats, and I know some people are coming in. And as I said before, think of this as a meeting, not a show. We're excited that everyone who got here when they did, and you're here for a reason. I'm going to jump right into it. There are folks watching on Zoom. There are folks here in the room. We've just watched these amazing actors with minimal rehearsal try to make sense of Paige's incredible article for WPLN and ProPublica. And I'm excited about tonight because we have folks watching, not just in Tennessee, but all over the country. And one of the aspirations for this project, for this experiment, is could we have national conversations? Could we have a conversation that's grounded in Tennessee and that speaks to New York? And can people in New York speak to people in Tennessee and other parts of the country? So that's the idea. So I'm going to throw this out, this first question, and then I'm going to throw out my question, and then we'll hear from some people here in the room. We'll hear from some people in Tennessee, and we'll bring them into the room as well. And then I'll move through a series of other questions, and we'll move from the room to other parts of the country. So now you've heard these actors going for broke, and you know the text of the story was set in Tennessee. For those of you in the room first, and then we'll go to other ones afterwards. What resonated with you as you listened to the story? What resonated with you here in this room? What touched you as you listened to Paige's story? What was true? And yeah, there's a hand right here. Go right here.
Yeah, how you doing? I'm Percy West. What touched me is that my mother experienced domestic violence for over 20
just a little, yeah.
My mother experienced domestic violence for over 25 years as a result of my father's actions. And it resonated with me because in Scott County, we didn't receive the same belief that, in the court system, as it relates to the police officers showing up. They used to tell my father to go for a walk. And this was the 80s. And they did not do anything for her. So continuously, it was like a cycle of continuous abuse because there was no consequences. And I can relate with the fact that in Lewis County, that's how it was in Brooklyn. And so it touches me because it's like I'm listening to it and I'm reliving the story of my mother's life, what happened with and what we experienced growing up and in the household. So,
That's so powerful. Thank you. There's so much that divides us in this country, but look at the things that can connect us when we acknowledge that we have shared experiences. I hear you saying there was abuse in your home, and I hear you say it was another abuse to have us be in a system that wouldn't do anything about that abuse, would allow it to be perpetuated over time. And you heard that in the story, and I appreciate that. What else did people resonate with? Yeah, there's a hand over here, and we'll come over here. Yes.
Michael Warren. What resonated is that the violence became normal. Like when you listen to what the judge was saying, an abnormal situation was normal. And a lot of times in society, our loved ones is the ones that hurt us the most, and not a stranger. So when you listen to it, you hear that loved ones is hurting the person the most, and that it becomes normal. And that's what violence becomes normal. It's not abnormal no more. So that's what resonated. And it's important to know that violence is a disease. And the only way you're going to cure it is through resources and healing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. There was a hand over here.
Hi, just that our fate is constantly being decided by men who think they know best.
There's a man who has his hand up over here.
Follow that up.
Obviously, it can work both ways, men to women and women to men, and we know this in society. And from personal experience, what resonated was feeling victimized, being the victim, and feeling you don't have any way of sort of getting help, and people not believing you, especially when it goes the opposite direction with women abusers.
Yes.
So that's what kind of resonates in my sense of hearing the story.
Yeah, I appreciate we've crossed this sort of gender threshold and complicated the conversation in really productive ways. And I appreciate you being so candid with your acknowledgement that being a man and not being believed is something that resonated with you as you listened to a story that was mostly about women not being believed. And we can make that connection, not just across regions of the country, but across genders. Really powerful. Someone else want to take some before I go to Scott County? Yeah, go right over here, and then we're going to come out to Scott County next. Go right ahead. Yeah.
I'm a native New Yorker, but I did spend 5 months in India where rape is like a national pastime and pretty much accepted. Women are in fear constantly. I was in fear constantly. And what I don't understand is all of these men have mothers. And I think that women could use that power more, raising their sons, because that's where it starts, when they're children, the attitude that they have toward women, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. One of the underlying questions throughout all of the questions I'm going to ask is, where does this impulse come from? And you've already started to answer it, but I also hear you saying, when going to another culture, to another country, and seeing how pervasive and forceful and acceptable it is to be violent in this way toward women or in sexual ways, that one can see how social conditions can frame how these things proliferate. And we hear that in the story. We heard it in talking about Brooklyn. We hear it in India because this is a global issue. And I hear you saying it has something also to do with how people raise their children. And I think that's a really great thing to bring into the room. I think we're gonna segue because we want to bring Scott County into the room. We have a group, we call it our ground site, not a watch party, because it's not passive, it's active. But Christy, I know you're out there. Does anyone in the room in Scott County want to respond to this question of hearing this story read by New York actors here in New York City at the Greene space at WNYC? What resonated with you in hearing it read out loud tonight? What touched you? What was true?
I'm Judge Scarlett Ellis, and I will speak first. Of course, we have in the room a lot of our team that makes our program successful. Some were not able to be here. But when I watched it, my first thought was thankfulness to Paige for coming and visiting with us, and such a great article that she wrote. Jay Peters is second there to the right with the black hair. She was able to join us tonight. And I think her voice speaks volumes for victims. But one of the things that resonated with me is victim safety first, always. Accountability from the defendant or the respondent, and changing the pattern is next. And our batterers intervention program, when the men come before me, after they've finished halfway through, they are able to share with new members of the court, new respondents of the court, as to what they've learned and how it has changed how they act and what they've learned about how to change their behaviors. There's just story after story we could tell, but what they say is when you first go, Judge Ellis has made you go, you're not going to want to go. You're not going to want to pay that money. You're not going to want to spend 26 Saturdays trying to change a behavior that you don't think needs to be changed. However, if you'll 6 or 7 sessions in, you will start to see the benefit. So I wanted to share that with you all so that you would see that we are keeping victims safe first, but we're also trying to reshape behavior.
Thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate you joining us. I know the one thing you probably didn't resonate with was our attempt at accents. But please know that it was done with the utmost respect and an attempt to bring the spirit, because we heard your voices in Paige's audio piece, and we tried to take in the spirit of what you said. But just know that we wrestled with that question a lot during rehearsal today. Does anyone else in Scott County want to respond to what touched you or resonated with you in hearing the reading of the article tonight?
I would. I'm Jane Peters, and I'm an attorney and also a survivor mentioned in the story. I wanted to just say that I agree with what Judge Ellis said. Essentially, these are human beings, and they, after 1 year, are not subject to the order of protection. So that revitalization and progress that they're able to make during the VIP and those classes it's just essential to the outcomes that we're seeing here in Scott County.
Wow, Jay, that's so powerful to hear you say, especially from what we know of your story and what a transformational story it is that you're now a lawyer working on the front lines, the cutting edge of this work. Thank you so much for sharing what resonated with you and for your compassion for perpetrators, which clearly is part of the way forward in Scott County. Anyone else from Scott County you can always come back in. We'll keep you on screen. All you have to do is hit the raise your hand button or just wave your hands in the air and we'll know that somebody else has something to say. But we're gonna go out back to our audience here. I'm gonna ask another question, and maybe as I'm asking questions, it'll move someone either in Scott County or on Zoom or in the room to want to speak. And you don't have to answer my questions. You can make up your own questions. You can answer them all together. It really doesn't matter to me. But I just want to move us through a couple of themes. So here's the next one I want to ask, and that's simply this: for those who have experienced or witnessed domestic violence or gun violence, how do we stop it? And what does justice look like for those who've been hurt? Somebody had a hand over here. Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
This is sort of an answer to that
That's fine.
Sort of my own question, but my name is Judy Clark, and I work with an organization called Survivors Justice Project, which works to implement a law that's in New York State that was fought for by survivors, women survivors, who were themselves criminalized and incarcerated out of what they did in response either to those who were victimizing them, but also in response to the pain they had that led to harm in other ways. And so I'll say two things. One is that a lot of the women I did time with who experienced domestic violence, they did not want to send people to prison because they knew that was just going to perpetrate it. So I was really interested in the attempt they were having to try to create a more restorative justice approach to it. And the other thing is that we have this idea that there's this clear line between the victims and the perpetrators, and there's no clear line. You know, that victimization leads to doing harm as much as it does. And so, but then when you end up in that situation, you are portrayed only as a perpetrator, and all of those issues don't get looked at. So I think we have to complicate the picture in a lot of ways.
Thank you. You've done a good job of doing that, and also, and that's what we're after, complexity. But I hear you saying that, the answer, justice does not look like more incarceration necessarily. It can be incarceration, but it doesn't necessarily look like incarceration. And there's something that you bring into the room, restorative justice, and maybe for victims and survivors, that's a more satisfying type of justice than seeing people hurt or re-victimized who perpetrated violence. That's such a powerful thing to hear you say, and I really appreciate you. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is that justice looks like different things for different people, right? And that for most folks, part of what that involves is around having agency and choice and how they move forward through the experience.
Yeah, which complicates things when, in the story, we see judges having a huge amount of agency in determining what justice will look like. And while it's great that there are these other opportunities for justice that isn't always carceral, I was listening to it tonight thinking, wow, judges have a lot of power, and do victims and survivors, is there a possibility of their feeling like they have or gain agency in situations where someone has so much power in the room?
And they have a lot of power, not always a lot of knowledge or training.
So she didn't have the mic, or they didn't have mic, but to say that judges they have a lot of power, and they often don't necessarily have a lot of training and understanding of the situation. So people may find themselves in a situation, and we had many judges, some of whom were with us tonight, I know on Zoom, and I know that Judge Hinson, I think, is watching too. So, and which we were delighted he would agree to come watch, and that this is a conversation we should be having. Yeah, there's a bunch of hands over here. Yeah,
I'll come to you.
And we'll go to Zoom in a second after we heard from a couple people over here.
My name's Jonathan Arroyo. I'm actually a participant of Project Restore Bed-Stuy, which is to answer your question about gun violence.
Yeah.
Actually, the program was actually started to prevent gun violence and gang indictments. I happen so to be actually a guy that was on a gang indictment and actually came home reformed. And I know that from the resources and the restorative justice and like we inside circles and like intense therapy can also prevent gun violence. Because of the guys that, to be honest with you, the guys that I actually was incarcerated for, we actually work with them now to rebuild the community that we destroyed. So restorative justice actually helped that portion of the anti-gun violence, and also that it was 2 summers, the quietest summers. And we're going to talk about numbers. Shootings was down about 85% from ages of 16 to 24 with the work and the resources that they put in the community for us to use, and we also abused it to actually help the community. So that's one of the many ways of restorative justice and other programming and resources for the communities where gun violence can happen, and also for domestic violence, because we also did focus groups with the women that also in the community, and we have an empowering women group that also is led by women, and if guys want to also be a part of it, that's also a space well, and that's when we that's what we collaborate with Man Up Incorporated, and I'm also my outreach worker supervisor for Man Up as well. So these are the resources that actually in these communities where these high-risk things may have happened, you put these resources in these communities, and then you can see the results happen itself. And I'm actually using myself as a perfect example of this happening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, James.
Hi. As you're talking about, I guess, the justice, I guess, part of the, I can also say I'm someone who's dealt with like coercive control, which is sort of related to domestic violence in a certain way. I'm also a supporter of abolition, which means I'm looking for solutions that are not involving, systems like that. One of the things that I thought about was the fact that the idea of rape culture or domestic violence for people who is not something that people are going to move away from. The people who might have been involved with it might still be out there, and they might in the future do something. They don't necessarily go away. So an also a person will then experience another relationship that might also have that in our society. So it's something that it's going to be out there, even if one person gets a restraining order. And then the idea of the solutions that would be something like where you have these programs that encourage people to look at their behavior and change as is kind of the solution to it. Not necessarily, there's not like a final solution for people. A lot of times they have to just find. You said the program shows that there are people who are willing to change, and that's kind of where the basic things. But they need the opportunity, and I guess the judge and her program is someone who's kind of doing that. So
thank you so much, and I really appreciate you bringing coercive control into the room as a comment, because we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about gun violence, we're talking about intimate partner violence, and there's a whole range of ways that people try to control each other and hurt each other. And yet, I think the answers to the questions don't radically change. But you also brought change into the room. And I hear you saying, I think, that it's great that there are programs that are focused on people changing their lives, and that maybe is the way forward. But there's no check the box, because people live long lives. And just because someone did a program or just because someone is working to change doesn't mean they'll always be able to change, if I hear you correctly.
If someone's in a relationship with this person right now, if the person doesn't go through a change process, then they're going to probably do it again to someone else, and that person still might come back to harm them.
Thank you. I appreciate you just clarifying, but the complexity of this. This is what we've got right now, and it seems like we're just sort of crawling up out of the soup of sort of 19th, 18th, 17th century notions of justice. And I hear people saying that restorative justice is a form of both healing and justice at the same time for all involved. But I also hear you saying it's life is long, and we're complicated creatures. So I appreciate all that. I want to go to Joe next, who's on Zoom, and we've got Rachel after him, and then Isaac. Joe, what resonated with you? How do we stop domestic and gun violence? What do you want to respond to tonight?
Again, thanks for doing all this. Found you guys during the stay-at-home time. Direct answer to your question, Brian, how do we stop this? It's more nuanced than what I'm going to say here. But maybe 10 years ago, I happened to be at an art reception, and there happened to be a sociology professor there, and I happened to, and he was involved in criminal justice. And I asked him, how do we solve our gun problem? And he said, we've got two parts to it. We need to separate the Venn overlap of people with a short fuse and easy access to powerful guns. And if you can do that, a lot of those gun problems and violence are going to go away. I don't work in the gun violence sector, justice. I am in a different sector and so forth. I've been on various Zooms over the years and so forth. I think what you're doing is great, Brian. You can do this long form journalism, reading and then Q&A from the audience. Often when we go to these events, it's with the same people. You know, you're on a scripted topic and so forth. There's more open-ended serendipity that's occurring here. And I think you really should, I advocate that you really go forward with this type of activity that you're doing here. The final thing I'll wrap up is one particular event I'm on once a week, dozen people, common topic. And I work in the climate sector. There's a few people that say, Joe, you need to look at both sides. NPR is, they're leftist and so forth. And it's like, you know, those general statements just don't really work. But I'm going to use this as an example of how local public radio, PBS Frontline, ProPublica, and your event, the arts, bringing this together to answer questions and show them that there are certain things that are, you know, opinion, obviously, but we've got certain facts that we need to deal with. You know, it's absurd that we don't even know all the statistics on gun violence nationwide. That's a failure of CDC and Congress for not enforcing that. So thank you for doing this. I hope others have more insight. By the way, I agree with everything that everybody said before. That's your field, you know, go for it. It's a good solution. Thank you again for this.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for everything you said. Thanks for acknowledging that the serendipity and sometimes the mistakes we make in these rooms is different than the way we consume media generally. That the news is a one-way stream. We don't have the opportunity to interrogate it this way, especially with the writer in the room and some of the judges on Zoom and the subjects with us. This is a totally different relationship to the news, and it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful experiment for us because I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty numb. And the only thing that can wake up my heart and make me feel like I'm connected to the things I'm reading is being in a room with other people responding to it. And we don't have to agree with each other. There's a hidden pain that connects all Americans. And it may be our way out of the divisions that divide us. We have to connect, and we're trying to do that right now. Rachel, you've been waiting for some time. What resonated with you? How do we stop this violence? What did you want to respond to tonight?
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've been doing human rights for women dealing with violence for 27 years. I would like to thank the people in Scott County for their really very, very good work on this. What I'd also like to say is that I'm in Cambridge, Mass. Once again, I said that. I've probably got more universities within reach than almost anywhere else on earth. And some of these universities, including the most prestigious, have some of the highest rape rates of any schools in America. That issue is not being addressed on the school campuses. And it is part of, I'd like to bring it up as part of the enculturation that people go through. So, in fact, the rape rates are so high, once you step on campus, it's higher than if you were stepping on the ground of Harvard Square. So we need to look at all of that. Those things are not being examined. They're being quietly put aside. They're addressed with some entry discussions on yes and no, but they're not substantially being addressed on the campuses or in the boardrooms or in the structure of our society. I really applaud you, Theater of War Productions, for doing this production, for speaking out, for showing people what a standard situation looks like and how that affects the women and the community. I often say that small towns are in some ways farther ahead than some of the big cities because you have a community that can work together and get things done. So in terms of how do we stop domestic violence, how do we slow down violence against women, the gun violence goes with it. I think we need to start looking at the highest levels of our society and how we structure our thinking around this, how it's structured into our our business models, our government models, our philosophical models. As one man put it, it's been normalized. We need to take it out of that normalization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you. Really great to hear from you. And almost like on cue, as we talked about public media and liberal bias, to acknowledge that we've done a performance tonight of a piece about rural Tennessee, but we could have easily framed a discussion about rape culture and violence against men and women and all genders by training our attention on college campuses and what happens there, or businesses, as you brought into the room. I really appreciate you acknowledging that and talking about potential solutions, but also the humility with which we have to look at this and our own communities. Isaac, you've been waiting for some time. We're going to go over to you, and then we're going to come back out to our audience here. Isaac, what resonated with you?
My name is Isaac Devine. I'm an assistant public defender in the 32nd Judicial District of Tennessee. And one of my counties, a county I will actually be at tomorrow, is Lewis County in front of Judge Mike Henson. A lot of this resonated with me, and I had the privilege of talking with Paige when she was in the first part of writing this article. An amazing reporter, and I think a very well done article. I would like to just say on the front end of my experiences with Judge Henson, I want to make clear that he cares very much about this issue, and he cares very much about the people involved in it. Many times, Judge Henson and I have had conversations regarding my clientele, which include domestic abusers and those charged with domestic assault, about what we can do to assist this individual to not be in the position again and to not put these victims into positions again. Unfortunately, as Paige's article points out quite well, I believe, we lack many resources in these counties. I must applaud Judge Ellis and what they have done out there in Scott County. It is a model that will definitely we see and will definitely be looking into, I'm sure. But as Paige points out, these batterers intervention classes that I know Judge Ellis's court is doing, our closest one is in Dixon, which, if you don't know where Dixon is, it is about an hour taking up a county highway for some of my clients who don't have driver's license or can't afford to get out there, can't afford to take a day off work. They have to go logging, and if they don't get their log money in, they can't pay their tickets that they may have accrued and therefore can't get to the batterer's intervention class. Internet capabilities are very limited. If you were to do, for example, a Zoom like this in many parts of Lewis County, you wouldn't be able to do that. So access, I think, is a huge part of this that often gets missed in these rural areas. It is important that we catch these issues on the front end and not on the back end. The quicker we can identify those individuals that may place others in risk, the easier it is to correct that behavior rather than waiting for multiple times down the road. But it is also important that you have the resources in place to correct that behavior. I would also just finally note that I want to raise an important other aspect of this beyond just judges, and that is prosecutors. In my district and in Lewis County in general, the prosecutors are almost always recommending batterer's intervention or anchor management as a condition of any plea or negotiated settlement. I can't give you exact specifics or statistics on that, but it is a conversation I have constantly with these individuals and a conversation I have with these DAs and these prosecutors. And I think it's important that we recognize that there are multiple people in this system and multiple people that can have an impact on these lives, both in protecting victims and in ensuring that an accused is rendered their constitutional rights fairly under our constitutional system of government. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you bringing a perspective from Lewis County into the room, and also someone who's worked with Judge Henson. I'm grateful for everything you brought into the room, and I'm excited because I think this there are people listening from all kinds of counties in Tennessee, and wisdom and perspectives are being shared not just in Tennessee, but in other parts of the country. And we're here to start a dialogue, and I'm glad we're talking across county lines and across state lines, and we're having this national conversation where there's room for everyone's perspective. I'm going to ask another question, and then I'm going to take a quick sort of station break. And again, you have to bear with me. It's my final piece of narration, and I promise we'll end on time. We always end on time. We talked about guns. I just want to name guns and say the word guns and say we're a nation that's divided by our feelings and attitudes toward guns. So I'm going to ask this as simply as I can. How do we prevent violence when it feels like guns are everywhere? You're my best customer, so I'm not going to come back to you. I'll come back. But yeah, there's a couple hands right here, and I promise if we have time, we'll come back. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Devin Dean. I'm the program manager of Transformative Initiatives at the RISE Project. We work at the intersection between gun violence and intimate partner violence. What really resonated me in this dialogue and this story is talking about that intersection. Largely, these issues have been siloed and treated as vacuum when we understand violence in our community happens in connection to each other. In New York City, the model that we are experimenting with at RISE, I like to say, is looking at how do we approach violence from a community-centered approach. And this is grounded in survivor-based work because survivors and communities in New York City were asking for an alternative to the criminal legal system. They did not want their partners who caused them harm or threatened them with gun violence to go to jail. They wanted the abuse to stop. So RISE emerged in a response to that. So we do this in a three-pronged model where we intervene with the person causing harm in a non-mandated approach, giving them the supports they need, and is completely free, removing barriers to accountability. The second approach is going out into community and doing norm-changing work around violence, around relationships, to challenge the norms that we established. And the third approach is being part of a network of credible messengers who are in the room, who are individuals who have connections to community and leveraging the relationships they have in community so we could target and reach those who are causing harm. Because the people causing harm are connected to somebody, and they're more likely to go to the person they trust, and then that person goes to the system and the organizations that they trust, and they can speak towards that. So this is the model that we have here, but this does not only have to look like in New York City. This is a model that we can replicate it across the country. It's all about relationship building work and letting survivors lead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name is Shaniqua Purvis. I'm the CEO of Both Sides of the Violence, Inc. And first of all, we have to acknowledge that guns don't kill people, people kill people. And once we understand that, then we can move forward. There's people that have guns in their house, they're not going outside to shoot nobody. And then there's people who, just have the mindset of, I have to get you before you get me. There's a difference. You understand? Resources, there are none. And everybody's sitting here talking about what we could do. Let's start with prevention. What if in kindergarten they had conflict mediation classes? What if in first grade they had conflict resolution classes? Hello, we have to start with the family. You talking about a problem, there's a tree, you talking about the branches, what about the root? And the root is family. And that's something that we all are synonymous with. Everybody has a family, and we have to start from there. Whoever goes to commit crimes, don't just get up and say, I'm going to kill someone's child today. Something happens. There's signs before this even happened. My sister was murdered by a stray bullet on the first floor 3 days after Christmas, holding my daughter right here when she was 5 months old. 18 years later, I spoke to her killer, and now I mentor him. That's both sides of the violence. And what he told me was, I used to be in his house playing cards with his mother. We all was around. It wasn't meant for my sister. But at the end of the day, he didn't wake up that day to say, I'm going to kill somebody. It just happened. So he remembered when I used to take kids out and take them out the city. And he was like, I wish you would have took me. But in families and households, especially urban communities, we say, oh, we not taking no bad kids with us. You understand? But what if I did take the bad kid? Will my sister still be alive? Let's start with the root, and that's family.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Anna Mae West. This is my brother Percy West and my mom, Audrey West, who was a victim of domestic violence for a very long time in her life. So I agree with everything that she said. It does start from the root, because a lot of the times people, children are going through violence themselves in the homes. And that's, if they're experiencing violence and they grow up in a violent home, as well as like what we did, what else do you know? So I think a lot of the times we forget that therapy needs to be something that's important. We don't discuss therapy. Yes, restorative justice and programs and things like that, but what about talking about your problems, what you went through as a kid, what you're experiencing now, what your children are seeing as well, as you're abusing their mom. So that's very important with bringing in therapy-based programs for those that, because I'm a New York City correction officer as well, so I've seen a lot. And what I noticed that helps these kids and the youth, adolescents, are programs. Not programs to teach them to drive and to get their license and things like that for them. So it has to be therapy-based, because it's, like she said, you're dealing with the root. And we go through a lot in our lives in general for those that are non-abusers. So just imagine what they're dealing with, not excusing that. It should also be for the victims as well. Mm-hmm. So everybody needs to be involved in some type of therapy-based programming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. I know someone behind you had their hand up as well. Yeah, but
how you doing? My name is Andre Robinson. I'm one of the directors for Man Up Incorporated. What we do is we attack violence from a mental health perspective, and we try to change the way they think in hope of changing their behavior. We also know that behind a lot of troubled kids, they coming from a troubled home, so we try to get down to the core of the problem, and so it won't happen again. And what justice looking like is not happening again. The same thing that might have happened to the victim. That's justice right there. Not to make sure that the person don't do it again, but to make sure it don't happen to another person again. That's true justice, right? And as I was saying, meeting them where they at and building them up and not being afraid of them. I never helped nobody that I ever was afraid of. Right now, us as elders, we're afraid of the youth. And the TV, the publicity, everything, it puts it out there to where a lot of us don't even want to address our youth. We have to address them. We have to build with them. That person might have a troubled father that might need help, that might need a job. We provide that. So when it comes all down to it, or an older brother that he might look up to, so we got to be able to provide that person with resources too. So what I think it boils down to, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. What I think it boils down to is awareness, resources, and really getting down to the core of these problems and really focusing on a solution instead of creating more problems on top of it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate everything we've heard from here in New York. I want to go back to Scott County because I saw that their hand went up. And we wanted this to be an exchange. I know some other people are waiting on Zoom too, but we're going to go to Scott County because I saw the hand up. Christy, somebody in the room at the college in Scott County want to speak to one of the questions I've asked tonight?
So my name is Brooke Claiborne, and I'm an addiction and mental health provider. And I want to address what my part is on this team. I have a privilege to sit in a room full of wonderful people. Being in a rural area, we do not have a lot of access to things. But I work for a federally qualified health center that offers integrated primary care with behavioral health treatment, medication-assisted treatment, and substance use disorder outpatient. And I've listened to what everybody has to say. The one thing that I want to bring to the table is that we not only forget about the victim or the perpetrator, but we forget about their ambivalence to change. Most people don't want to change. They can be court-ordered to change, but if they don't want to change, they're not going to change for anybody, no matter themselves or anyone else. The other part to this is one young man said that if we meet people where they are, that is an awesome statement, because a lot of people in the criminal justice system They are only talked about what they did negatively, not what they're doing positively today. They can't change what they did yesterday. They worry about tomorrow and forget about today. That's what I teach in my philosophy of being able to educate the patients on how to move forward. Our treatment is a whole-centered treatment for patients. We are having a conversation, and I work with adolescents, I work with adults. So when I walk into a room and I want to have a conversation with somebody, it's, hey man, what's up, how you doing? That's my conversation, because I'm making you feel comfortable. And their therapeutic alliance is you want to make sure that they're respected, they're willing to commit to treatment, and they have admitted that they do have a problem and that they do want to work on themselves. But living in a rural area, the access that we have to treatment is absolutely phenomenal. And I wish every facility had what we had. I'm 10 minutes from the courthouse. They can call me, I can see a patient. I do all kinds of assessments on them. I get to see, but when the patient comes in and they want to have a conversation, 1, we have fear, 2, we have culture diversity, and 3, communication is very vital. These people do not know how to communicate. Behavior is their problem and their triggers. They do not know how to identify what their triggers are. So the 4 steps that you get to teach them is how they feel, what they think, how they talk about it, and then how they behave. Because at the end of the day, all we have is a response to everything. They're not doing any of the other 3.
Thank you so much for sharing what you do and for sharing the resources that are available in your community. And I'm noticing this pattern in this conversation where we are talking about a question of resources and programs and access and medical access as well. And that, and we even heard that in Lewis County. I appreciate you bringing that perspective into the room. Anyone else in Scott County before I move to someone else on Zoom? Yeah, go right ahead.
I just wanted to say that Scott County hasn't always had a VIP program, so it's not necessarily limited to counties that already have a program there. If your closest program is an hour away, and it's really important to that judge, then you can develop your own VIP program. You can have access by Zoom. Most people are going down to the McDonald's and using the internet if they don't have access, and I believe that would probably be something that is available in Dixon, Tennessee, or wherever the other county is featured in the article. So we can make a lot of excuses, but if it's really important, then someone there can make this happen.
Thank you so much for that challenging sort of rebuttal. Yeah, I appreciate that. Spoken like a true prosecutor or lawyer. The question of access can't be the reason people don't pursue change, and it can't be why a county doesn't pursue innovating in this critical way when it's obviously the way forward. Thank you so much for bringing it into the room. I'm going to break just for a second, and then I'm going to use it to sort of reset, and I promise again we're going to be done on time, but I have to read this. I'm going to try to sound like I'm speaking naturally to you in the room as I do, so it'll come through people's speakers and feel like we're having an intimate conversation. I'm Brian Dories, and this is Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. I'm Brian Dories, and you're listening. I'm Brian Dories, and you're listening to a live performance of Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Actors just performed a piece from ProPublica and WPLN. Actors just performed a piece from ProPublica and WPLN in Nashville. The article's called, "In Rural Tennessee, Domestic Violence Victims Face Barriers to Getting Justice. One county has transformed its approach." It tells the story of advocates, judges, survivors, and others who are trying to change what happens in small communities when people use guns to hurt spouses, family members, and friends. At Theater of War Productions, we always invite people with something at stake into our rooms. Here in New York City, the audience is filled with survivors of domestic and gun violence, advocates, and people who've caused harm, sometimes with guns, credible messengers who are trying to make change in their communities. We also have a group of community members in Scott County, Tennessee, who've gathered at a local community college to join our discussion via Zoom. Many of them have firsthand experience with the story we just heard. It's my job to ask questions and get the conversation going. Okay, so on to my question. That wasn't so bad. I'm getting better at it as we do it. I'm getting better. No. Thank you for the encouragement. We've heard a lot about change. And at the center of the programs that we've heard about the intervention programs with perpetrators and those who've caused harm, there's a core belief that people can change. Some people don't want to change. People can't be made to change, but people can change. Can someone here share a story about how you or someone you've loved or known has changed? We go there. Oh, we go right here and we'll go there and there. It's okay.
Well, mine has.
That's okay.
It's not with.
It doesn't matter.
change.
It doesn't matter. It's all one thing. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Nobody's mentioned how do they in Tennessee use substance abuse? Because my husband was an alcoholic and he abused drugs, and for 25 years he was always under some influence and abused me. So I want to know, how do they handle that in Tennessee? What kind of resources, if the person has an alcohol or drug problem, which also stems from a lot of domestic violence and gun violence?
That's a great question. Christy, do you mind, maybe someone in the room in Scott County could respond to that question of how do these programs respond to substance abuse and addiction as it pertains to preventing domestic violence and gun violence in Scott County?
I think there's many in the room here that can actually answer those questions. But one of the first things that came to my mind as she was talking was our former judge, who's now retired, that started all the programs as to why we're here today, Judge Cotton, always talked about you have to take, it's like an onion and you have to peel the layers back to find out what is there and then address those layers. And so I'm going to pass it on to Judge Ellis and probably Brooke to talk a little bit about what, from their perspectives, having someone in front of them for domestic violence that also has those other issues.
Yes, and there are really two paths. Defendants come before the court, and General Taylor is sitting here next to me. She's the prosecutor. And if there's not been an order of protection, then they come into the domestic violence court through that criminal action. And I would say 99.9% of the time, General Taylor, part of their plea is that they have both an alcohol and drug assessment and a mental health assessment. And most of the defendants get that at the same facility. Brooke Claiborne does those at her facility, and we've got 5 different places, 2 primarily in Scott County. The other way someone comes through the court is through an order of protection. Sometimes those overlap and sometimes not. But if I grant an order of protection, if there's always a mental health assessment. And if there's history of substance abuse, there's also an alcohol and drug assessment. And most of the time those go hand in hand and are jointly ordered. Then when they come back to the domestic violence court, regardless of which way they get to me, the domestic violence compliance court, they have to bring those assessments to me. I look to see if there's recommendations, and then they have to each month tell me, bring me something that they have went to their appointments, they're following through, they're cooperating. And I have them in my domestic violence compliance court for a year.
Thank you so much for illustrating how it works in Scott County, especially from a legal perspective. It sounds like, again, we're back into this court and legal system where you might end up there for a number of reasons, but having an alcohol and substance abuse assessment becomes de facto part of that experience, and then having court-ordered treatment also becomes a part of that experience as well. So this is a Venn diagram where there are lots of overlaps, and the court is acknowledging that, and I appreciate you bringing that into the room. But also I heard you talking about, again, this main narrative struggle at the center of Paige's story and the conversation we're having tonight. People who have been ordered by a court to change or else face more serious consequences, who may or may not change. And there's a judge who's asking them to come before them over and over again to assess whether they're changing or not over the span of a year, which I appreciate you illustrating for us. So back to this question of, can people change? And can you tell us a story about someone you know or loved, or maybe yourself, changing?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Bostic. I do think people could change. I think echoing what a lot of people Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Bostic. I do think people can change, and echoing what everyone said in this room, I think it's a lot of systems that fail an individual before the incarceration system catch them, or for something as tragic as domestic violence, or even seriously seriously hurting another partner happening. Me, for myself, when I was 9 years old, my father was murdered, and it caused me to go down a spiral. It's a bunch of organizations, including Man Up, Both Sides of the Violence, and Rise, who I've been a part of. But what was really impacting me was that I was a victim of limited exposure. When I walked outside, it was a sad reality of someone being a substance misuser, or someone dealing with domestic violence in their household and then don't have nowhere to use all this trauma that they have inside their body, which will lead to them becoming incarcerated. So fast forward a couple years of my life, spiraling, not knowing what to do, getting to my mom telling me, yo, it's either you get a job or go to school, right? Everything, especially coming from an unprivileged community of Bedford-Stuyvesant. I was like, Ma, I really don't want to go to school, and I really don't want to get a job. But this is me being the victim of limited exposure. Until I got some of these programs, until I start getting access, right? Then I got a program, Project Restore Bed-Stuy, where my friend Jonathan said before, it was two rival gangs who got together, and at the 8th month mark of getting holistic services, they was able to have a sit down, right? So a neighborhood that had a gang indictment in one and a gang indictment in another, and they shipping 18 people to 40 years of life and the other 16 to 50 years of life. We didn't know what we was gonna do. I didn't have no ID, I didn't have no bank account, and I really didn't have no life. And then my sister was murdered right after that, so I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, my life is just spiraling. I don't know what I do, but every problem that someone told me to do is to handle something with violence, right? So, but then I was able to get therapy. I was able to go to Inside Circle and begin to heal. And just in 1 year, I was able to get my ID, I was able to get a bank account, I was able to get a 401k, and I was able to become a Columbia University student. So I went from someone from not having no track, I went from someone from not having no resources, and just with 1 year of resources, 1 year of knowledge, 1 year of knowing the Brown-Brenner model and knowing that the environmental factors around me affect me, knowing that the trauma, not just of me and what I went through, but my friends and my peers, the things that they tell me, the peer pressure that comes from it affects me. And once I was able to learn that, I was able to navigate, then I was able to bring something called community conversation, which everything I was learning at Columbia, I was able to take them concepts, take this terminology, and teach it to my community, right? They say, yo, the Brown-Brenner model, yo, this is why this is happening. The strain theory model by Robert K. Merton, this is the stress cause criminology, right? And then now I think in this room, I'm super inspired hearing everyone's stories, hearing everyone talk. This is what caused change, right? Being here and hearing all y'all talk really resonated with me, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you. April, you've been waiting for some time on Zoom. I want to make sure we get to the last few people that are on Zoom, and then maybe someone here wants to tell us one last story of change in the 10 minutes we have left together in this conversation. April?
Yeah, I am a researcher, and my expertise is domestic violence and firearm violence. And I want to praise Paige for this excellent piece, because any research I do can, hopefully make a difference, but journalism and art can really reach the masses and make a difference. But I want to address how do we stop this? And with domestic violence and guns, this is an all hands on deck situation at this moment, and we need all kinds of interventions at all levels. We need those pre-K and kindergarten through 12th grade courses on healthy relationships and conflict mediation, and we need community organizations doing good work to help people get jobs, and a place where people can go and get resources to help them. And we need law enforcement and courts for those people for whom the other things aren't going to work. Restorative justice has been brought up a lot. Restorative justice can be great for those who aren't familiar with it. It often takes years for the parties involved to get to a place where restorative justice can work, because there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. before restorative justice. And so often there's an incarceration. And then once the person who's perpetrated the harm is ready and truly is apologetic and ready to face that and take accountability, then we can have restorative justice. I do want to point out, better intervention programs. There's not a lot of evidence that they make change for people who have perpetrated intimate partner violence. You need a really good program, and a lot of them aren't really good. So you really need to work with your community and get people who are very qualified to do this and follow evidence-based programming. And there's not a lot of it out there. Everything that we do, we need to evaluate it and find out if it works. Because if it doesn't work, let's throw it away and find something better so we can really make change.
I really appreciate you complexifying the conversation and also holding us to account. We can feel hopeful and excited that these programs exist, while also interrogating whether they work and how to make them better. And it's not an either or. We don't have to throw them out. The impulse is the right impulse. We can continue to iterate and evolve on all the wisdom that's been shared in the room to find the best way forward. But it takes research, and it takes great reporting, and it takes collective action. Natalie, you've been waiting for some time. Natalie, what do you want to speak to you?
Yeah, hi everybody. I am a law professor coming to you from Texas, and I actually also study the intersection of firearms and domestic violence. And so I'm thrilled to be here. I think about the law a lot, and I just have one thing I want to say about the law, but then I really just want to lift up and echo a lot of what other people have said. So look, I mean, I think what Paige's piece so beautifully shows us is that systems are made up of people, right? And today we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of the people who make up that system, right? I think many of us, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. I think a lot of people might assume that judges know the law, understand the law, will apply the law in a way that is equitable and fair. But we hear in Paige's piece, right, judges saying we don't worship the law, right? And for me, kind of going back to your first question, like what stood out to you, I think as the law professor, I'm going like, no, but wait, like that's kind of your job as a judge to uphold the law, right? But then on the other hand, right, when it suits a particular judge to say, well, you know what? People have Second Amendment rights and we're not going to take them away. And that's just actually the one place that I did want to just make sure everybody was very, very clear that people who have perpetrated domestic violence, whether that's a felony or misdemeanor criminal domestic violence offense, or somebody who's subject to a domestic violence protective order, actually loses that Second Amendment right. So I think to the extent that we're having a conversation that involves the Second Amendment, again, as somebody who studies this, like that is not actually factual, right? So just wanted to really make that clear. And then sort of all the law mumbo jumbo aside, I think I too have become a bit disillusioned with the capacity of the legal system exclusively to help solve this problem. So back to your question of sort of what do we do? How do we fix it all? I mean, we know that we've got laws on the books. We know from research that April and others have done that enforcement is just not happening. I think as we've heard, a lot of that is a question of resources, right? Many communities, mine included, just has decided that they don't have the resources on the books to enforce the law. So we're left with an honor system, right? And so really what I've come to is what we've been hearing all night is just the importance of culture change, right? Of violence intervention programs and how critical they can be, of getting to people, again, as early as pre-K and as late as on our college campuses, as we've heard before, thinking about substance abuse, thinking about mental health, thinking about programs like this that, again, are providing this really vital community education. And I think maybe the only thing I will say, the last thing is maybe what we haven't heard. I recently did some research interviewing men who were participating in a batterer intervention program here in Texas, and they were court ordered to do so. And I was really curious about why they were not turning in their guns, because again, here in the state of Texas, believe it or not, they weren't allowed to have them. And so what I heard over and over and over and over again from these men was, I heard a lot of things, but the thing that was most consistent was that I'd rather be caught with it than without it, right? That their communities aren't safe. And that therefore they're going to take the calculated risk. And honestly, it's probably a pretty good one. Back to we don't enforce that they just rather have the gun because where they are is just not a safe place to be without it. So anyway, all of that, the community safety, I think, is a really, really important piece of this that we need to be thinking about. So sorry for being so long-winded.
Thank you. No, it's great to hear from Texas. It's great to hear from a legal expert, and also to have you laying down some hard realities about gun laws in our country and as they're applied to questions of domestic violence and protection. So I appreciate it. We have time for just a couple more, and so I apologize if I'm going to rush you these last few people, but I want to hear MEIS, is that Mice, who's only on audio. If you're there, we'd love to hear from you from wherever you are out in the world.
So my name is Mel's Halpern. I'm actually a blogger, and I blog about domestic violence and restorative justice. And I've actually been someone who has worked my way through the system. Everything from getting an order of protection and living in domestic violence shelters in New York, all the way to supportive housing. And now I'm actually in the grad school process now with getting my MSW. So it's like I kind of been through the whole thing. I think really the big problem comes from the fact that judges, lawyers, even law enforcement, they are not trauma informed. And that's what I think the big issue is in New York. They're not mandated to take classes and understand compassion and sensitivity to cases. And I think that would really change the game if it was normalized to, or even enforced for lawyers and judges to take trauma-informed classes. So they're more aware of the emotional state and the dangers of the victim, and also the danger potential of the perpetrator or the abuser. In terms of what you were asking before about can change, and like April, I agree. I research a lot on this topic, not just gun violence, but a lot of different types of violence, that it's really hard to rehabilitate abusers. At least that's whatever limited research we have now, that's what it says. And if anything, I feel like the investment right now should be made more for the survivors, because their healing is really not about resilience or bouncing back to where they were. Because if you do that, go back to the baseline, they're going to go back to what harmed them in the first place. So the idea of reinvention, being the person that is different, someone who's not susceptible to the violence, I think that should be the priority. The big issue now is all these programs that everyone suggests, they're wonderful and they have potential, but where is the money coming from? Money runs programs, and the Department of Justice, all their violence against women grants, they got completely frozen, for at least for now, and they've been in that state since February. They even pulled back funding that was already awarded. So while these programs sound great, they're not going to happen. So I just wanted to throw out there, if anybody has any ideas of what we can do, that's not based on money.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Katrina, I apologize to be rushing you. We've got about 20 seconds for you to jump in and offer us something in the fleeting time we have left. Katrina, what did you want to speak to?
Thank you so much. I'm an emergency physician in Nashville, Tennessee. Love Paige and WPLN and all their work. And I just wanted to point out that the funding for a lot of these programs has just been abruptly cut off by the current administration. $150 million is going away from the Justice Department grants that fund gun violence prevention programs all across the U.S. So what can you do? Call your congressperson, call your senators, demand to reinstate the funding for these programs that we so desperately need in areas all across the country, because we can't do the work without the funding to do the work.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It sounds like there's one more person in Scott County. Over to you, Scott County.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly say, as the judge, I can't order change. That has to come from the individual. I order the assessments, and then they go to all these people in the room, and all these people help assist them. They make the change themselves. I just applaud them for it when they come back before me, that they've been going to their meetings and making the change.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. No one can order change, but on the subject of change, in the very fleeting over time limit seconds we have left, I wonder if someone would like to take us home with an answer to my final question about, have you seen someone change? Have you known someone in the back over there? Nope, right there. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh, there's a hand here too. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Right here.
It's okay. Yeah, you can go ahead back there. It's okay.
Michael Warren, Brownville, Think They Matter. So I'm a product of change, right? Because I was once violent, right? And I had to look in the mirror and see I destroyed my neighborhood. So I went back and restored, and I helped so many kids from 4 to 25, just helping them, making sure they reshape their mind from violence and thinking better. So that's my story, and it's beautiful to see change. You could change within yourself. You gotta look in the mirror though. You gotta look in the mirror and know that you're doing something wrong.
Thank you so much. You wanna go here?
Hi, everybody. Ruby here. So I'm a survivor of DV, and I wanted to say like what a person can do like as an individual. I know there's never money. We're always broke, right? Like you as an individual can change the language that you use, not just put a label on somebody, you know, because you need to be able to create the space for them to change. The reason now I have a healthy relationship with the father of my child, no longer together, is because I created a space for him to feel heard. You're hurting me. Yes, you're hurting me. And you're hurt. And you're scared. And you're probably mad. You're afraid. I created both spaces, holding them together. Not you're a batterer, you're an abuser. No, you're also loved. You're also a father. You're also a son. You know, and I think creating that and then not isolating the person. Because we're so quick to isolate and put you in this group and that's it, and we're just gonna shun you out. No, I'm gonna welcome you with open arms, even if that's apart from being with me. I don't have to be with you in your process, but I can definitely be in your process, right? And then also teaching your kids. Something my son tells me all the time, you tell me what not to do. What should I do? You're right. Let me lead by example. And when it comes to the justice system, punishment is punishment, right? But then you need to also have accountability, right? And teach these people what to do, how to share your words, how to speak, how to show up, how to be present, and how to do these things. Don't just tell me what not to do, because that doesn't work.
Those are all beautiful. So there's someone right here. Our last word is going to be right there, and then I got to do my final credits, and we're going to be out. Oh, yeah, there should be no. Yeah, go ahead. We'll go right here. Yeah, it's okay.
How you doing? My name is Shania Purvis. I'm with Both Sides of the Violence. I don't really have a lot to say. I just want to end it off with my favorite quote. Never let temporary feelings determine a permanent situation. So however you feel today, you might not feel like that tomorrow. Yeah.
I just want to say that everyone has the capacity to change. You know, my life started rough. I did 33 years in prison. I was sentenced to 132 and a half to life. I gave back time. I was, you know, my prison bid was didn't start good. I changed my life in order to obtain my freedom. And right now, I'm home. I'm doing the right thing. I'm not going backwards. I'm a part of restorative justice. You know, I assist with the youth in the community, the young men, so they can change as well, letting everybody know that they have the capacity to change. Now, you have people languishing in prison right now who have changed. This is why we're pushing a Second Look Act, so we can, you know, free them as well, you know? So that needs, you know. So, I mean, once you believe in change, you know that we all change. None of us are the same people we were at a younger age, right? And we know that, like Lawrence Steinberg said, he has a study of neuroplasticity, which the brain don't fully develop until you're 24 years old, 25 years old. So, you know, at that stage, you know, people change. So I believe we all can change, and whether a victim, a perpetrator of crime, people change and give everybody an opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Percy, thank you so much for communicating that. What I really think is interesting is I had an opportunity to meet Brian Dories and Marjolaine Goldsmith at a place called Rikers Island 13 days after I was released from serving 20 years, 7 months, and 18 days in maximum security prisons all across New York State. Shortly after receiving clemency from the governor, I realized how important change is. I realized that if I did some introspection, that we could address some of the root causes and challenges that come with so many carceral systems. And you're right, we have to hold people accountable, but we also have to hold systems accountable. We have to know that accountability and compassion and empathy and love can exist in the same space.
You've been listening to Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Theater of War Productions is me, Brian Dories, and producers Marjolaine Goldsmith, Dominic DuPont, and Adam Isco. Paige Pfleger reported the story for WPLN and ProPublica. At WNYC, this was produced by Emily Botine, Ryan Wild, Katarina Barton, Jared Paul, Jason Saul, and Kenya Young, and the entire technical team at the Greene Space. That's Chase Coolpon, Robert McGinnis, James Cronier, Sean Wee, Marika Hacking, and Rachel Hacking. We want to thank the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, who made this production possible through their generous financial support. Thank you for listening.